This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who support us on Patreon and Substack. To learn more, go to patreon.com/trifles or trifles.substack.com. Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the cyclist was solitary, the bachelor was noble, and the resident was patient, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? On which 3 continents did Watson have experience of women? When did 221B Baker Street first get telephone service? And why does Holmes prefer telegrams over writing?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 437, Capital Punishment. Well, hello and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
That is just so capital, my boy.
Capital. Yes,
That's
no lowercase.
Lowercase. Small caps. Well, we are not here to talk about fonts or kerning or anything as boring as that. No, we're here to talk about crime and punishment, the ultimate in punishment, capital style. That's where punishment is meted out in London. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Capital punishment.
Yeah.
No, we're going to talk about the death penalty. Perhaps which canonical villains would have been eligible for it, the history of capital punishment, and mentions of it in the Sherlock Holmes stories. So stay tuned as we discuss this wide-ranging topic. Meanwhile, we would like to remind you that we do appreciate the support that we've seen from many of you. Keep it coming. And that support can not only come in a monetary way on Patreon or Substack, where you get access to bonus content and you're eligible for free drawings at the end of the month for prizes. But it also comes from your comments, from your participation. We do have comments turned on for our subscribers in Patreon and in Substack. And we also get wonderful comments, ratings, and reviews in Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So wherever you happen to listen to us, a little participation is absolutely welcome. And you're also welcome to email us if you don't feel like participating in the forums there. Our email address is trifles@ihearofsherlock.com. We appreciate everything that you have to contribute to making our show better. Thank you. Well, Bert, capital punishment. It's not really a light and sunny topic.
No.
But we want to cover a little bit of the history first, give people some sense as to where we're coming from. And I think we'll make a little fun out of it, and then we'll visit the canon. So, how would you like to? How would you like to hang around on this topic?
Well, hanging is a great place to start because if you look at the cases of Sherlock Holmes, you do find the theme of hanging popping up again and again and again and again and again. And just to take sort of a couple of examples, for example, in The Resident Patient, there's a reference to the fact that Cartwright was hanged. And then in NORW...
Well, who was Cartwright? Do you recall who he was?
Ben Cartwright. He was the fellow who owned the Ponderosa with Hoss and Little Joe.
Yeah, I don't know if Sherlock Holmes knew of those Cartwrights.
And Adam.
No, Cartwright was part of the Worthington Bank business. 5 men were in it.
Oh, that's right.
These 4 and a 5th called Cartwright. Tobin, the caretaker. was murdered. There's a good trivia question for a Sherlockian event, Sherlockian quiz. Tobin, the caretaker at the Worthington Bank. He was murdered. The thieves got away with it, and with £7,000. Of course, it was Blessington, or Sutton as he was known then, who was the worst of the gang. He turned informer, and on his evidence, Cartwright was hanged, and the other three got 15 years apiece.
Well, and then, Jonas Oldacre in the Norwood Builder, has done his best, as Holmes says, to get an innocent man hanged by suggesting, trying to create the idea that he was murdered by what's his name?
John Hector McFarlane.
The unhappy John Hector.
Yes, very unhappy.
Right.
Yeah. And in the Mazarin Stone, Count Silvius Negretto mentioned, he said, there was an old sporting man. Today it was an elderly woman. They held me in view all day. Holmes says, really, sir, you compliment me. Old Baron Dowson said the night before he was hanged, and in my case, what the law had gained, the stage had lost. So Holmes was responsible, I guess, for sending old Baron Dowson away to the gallows.
And then in Sign of Four, of course, Holmes's famous comment when he's advising, Watson not to be too focused on the attraction of women. Holmes comments, the most winning woman I ever knew was hanged.
What for?
Not for the murder of her children for the insurance money.
It's the worst. It's the worst. And in the Boscombe Valley mystery, where there was circumstantial evidence that was at stake, Watson said, many men have been hanged on far slighter evidence. And Holmes replied, so they have. And many men have been wrongfully hanged. And in that case, we have young McCarthy, who is in serious trouble and likely to be hanged. So those are our canonical mentions of hangings. And I suppose we should note that Blessington in The Resident Patient hanged himself. Oh, right. So that was a hanging.
Well, he didn't really hang himself.
Well, that's true.
He appeared to have hung
himself.
himself.
He was executed by his former bank gang members. Yeah. So yeah, they were judge, jury, and executioner in that case.
Yeah.
So, well, why don't we, before we look at who else might have been eligible for hanging in the canon, why don't we look at a little bit of history of capital punishment in England?
Generally, I think, hanging was a prominent feature of so-called British justice. What happens over the centuries is that exactly how you accomplish capital punishment, the scope and the manner and so on, differ and evolve. Public executions were eventually abolished, and in the 18th century and in the 19th century, there were some changes. But initially, you could get hung, you could become hanged for a wide variety of offenses, some of which are very surprising.
Yeah. And this dates to 1689, when there were 50 offenses that were on the statute book, punishable by death. And over the next almost 100 years, these offenses, the number of offenses, reached 220 by the end of the 1700s. And the wide variety of offenses, and later on this became known as the Bloody Code, simply because it was so wide-ranging. There were 49 pages of capital statutes of the 18th century that are divided into 21 categories. They range from high treason, including offenses against Protestant succession and the Protestant establishment, offenses against the state, against public order, against the administration of justice, against public health, against public revenue, including smuggling, So that's high treason and offenses. There's petty treason and murder. What's petty treason? Is that when you go against the king just because he miffed you for some reason, or
Well,
calling the king names? Is that petty treason?
Well, kind of. If someone killed or otherwise violated the authority of a social superior other than the king.
Oh, other than the king. Okay.
Other than the king.
That's okay.
So if the lord of the manor, tells you to move that hay bale, and you say,
you tell
get
him
stuffed, you get stuffed, you wind up swinging on the end of a rope.
Yikes! That is not worth it at all.
Yeah.
Oh. So there's also stabbing, maiming, and shooting, rape, forcible abduction, other sexual offenses, simple grand larceny. Is that an oxymoron? Simple grand larceny. Burglary, larceny from the person, larceny and embezzlement by services, blackmail, bankruptcy, forgery, falsely personating another. Not impersonating, but personating, destroying ships to the prejudice of insurance companies, so insurance fraud, coinage offenses, malicious injuries to property, including arson, and my favorite, piracy.
Yo ho. Well,
so those could all get you the death penalty.
Yeah. I mean, in general, this echoes the social order in Britain and in the Victorian age and how important it was. And, the idea is that everybody has their appointed place. And if you are seen as threatening the framework, in the 17th century in particular, that was, you were severely and terminally dealt with.
Yeah.
And the other thing is property. So there's a comment somewhere where someone says, we are executing horse thieves not because we have anything, because we do not hold human life in high regard, but because we do not wish horses to be stolen. Therefore, we are executing horse thieves.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do here. Get with the program.
Seriously. I like how also in that section how grand larceny was defined as the theft of goods worth more than 12 pence, which was about 1/20th of the weekly wage for a skilled worker at the time. Goodness. So that's, you can see by the breadth and severity of these crimes and punishments, that is why this was known as the Bloody Code. It was later relaxed. The Judgment of Death Act, 1823, made the death penalty discretionary for all crimes except for treason and murder. So, and we'll get back to treason and murder as the cases that we'll consider in the Sherlock Holmes stories. But before that, I think we want to look at, there's a wonderful article on Ranker called 11 Ridiculous Crimes That Carried the Death Penalty Before Queen Victoria. And you and I were reviewing these before the show. We were just cracking up by some of them. So why don't you take us through the list?
Well, the list, some great things on the list. Being in the company of gypsies. Now, I refer, of course, to our prior episode of Trifles about gypsies, G-Y-P-S-I-E-S or G-I-P-S-I-E-S. Being in the company of gypsies for more than a month. So if you want to go get your fortune told in the 1820s and you're sitting there for 30 days, you better get out of the tent, because if you've been there for more than a month, that is capital punishment.
Yeah, and one writer says, getting to the heart of the insanity of such a law, murder of the king carried the same penalty as being in the company of gypsies.
Yeah, that'll teach you. Yeah. Damaging Westminster Bridge.
What?
Yeah, well, it was the Westminster Bridge was strategically important. Dogs couldn't even cross it.
What?
It opened in 1750 as only the second bridge in London that crossed the Thames.
So if you were walking your dog in Westminster and wanted to get back to the other side of the river, and you were near the Westminster Bridge, you had to go all the way down, maybe the London Bridge, to cross if you wanted to take your dog with you.
Well, or take a ferry. Probably
That's true. Yeah.
This was probably a law passed by the Guild of Ferry Pilots. But damaging London bridges was listed in 1787. And Westminster was the only one where willfully damaging or destroying meant you were guilty of felony. And then, here's one that refers to the environment in a Sherlock Holmes case. Strong evidence of malice in a child.
Oh. This capital crime was intended for children between 7 and 14 years of age. And they had to prove that the child didn't have the ability to tell right from wrong. Goodness.
Smack, smack, smack.
Yeah, well, that's who I thought of originally as young Edward Rewcastle. Also, what about little Jackie Ferguson?
Ooh.
And now, I don't know if you can prove that he knew right from wrong. Maybe he did know it was wrong. That'd be an interesting legal case to take up. But according to this article, throughout the Bloody Code era, there were indeed cases of kids aged 12 to 18 who were executed for malicious crimes, ranging from housebreaking to rape and murder. And it wasn't until 1908 that the minimum age for execution was raised to 18. Wow.
And there was a case from 1629 where an 8 or 9-year-old was executed for arson.
Oh. Don't play with matches, kids.
Yeah. And then blacking yourself up at night.
What?
Now, on the one hand, executing somebody for blacking themselves up sounds pretty good to me. But this has nothing to do with cultural aversion to blackface or anything like that. The crime that people thought worthy of the death penalty was darkening your face at night. And the reason for that is it made people think you were a burglar. So looking like a burglar, you're looking shifty and dark and looking like a burglar, that could get you hanged.
That is crazy. You're just suspicion by virtue of appearance.
Appearance, yeah.
Wow. And then there's also cutting down young trees. Court documents from the Isle of Ely in 1821, or Ely, reveal the thinking behind this one. A man was executed for cutting down young trees in a plantation and also set fire to corn stacks and slashed fine horses and cows with a knife. Wow, this guy was on a spree. But it was cutting down the trees that most offended the judge. Cutting down young trees from malice to the owner is as great a proof of malignity in the criminal as a malignity in the criminal, and may be a much greater injury to the owner. For wealth may replace the corn and the cattle, but the loss of trees is irreparable, both to the owner and to the public. Wow.
And then there's among these things that are very disturbing, there's one: unmarried mother concealing a stillborn child. And the idea here is that an unmarried woman that doesn't immediately disclose that she gave birth to a stillborn child is assumed to have killed the child and therefore deserves to die. And married women, meanwhile, were spared that because, of course, they were married. So,
yeah. You could also get the death penalty for writing a threatening letter. Oh, goodness. I shall write a threatening letter to someone about that.
Yeah.
One of the first people to be hanged for sending a threatening letter in England was Jephthah Bigg in 1729. He tried to demand money with menaces. It became a capital offense to send any threatening letter as of 1754, whether or not the sender was trying to blackmail someone. So, goodness.
And stealing from a shipwreck. The vociferous and insistent pressure from representatives of the ship-owning community, the insurance companies, and the merchants led to an English law in 1753 that made looting wreckage punishable by death even if no one aboard had survived. And even the military were asked to intervene to enforce the law. And, there was a shootout between soldiers and wreckers near Bridgend in the 1780s. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And also, circling back to other Trifles topics, here's one. Returning from transportation. I mean, coming back from the cab or... No, this is transportation, is when people were exiled. I think we talked about Australians and Sherlock Holmes back in, I want to say around episode 130. You'll have a link to that episode in the show notes. But of course, criminals under the time of George I were frequently sent to America, Africa, or Australia as a life sentence. Typically, it was life, 14 years, or 7 years, depending on the severity of the crime. But if they happened to find their way back to England, they faced the death penalty just for breaking the law a second time. Right? So the first time would have been the reason they were sentenced. The second time would have been escaping. And that is exactly what Victor Trevor Sr. was deathly afraid of in The Glorious Scott.
Yeah, absolutely. And it shows you why. Yeah. Fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
And then just a couple of other ones to wind up the list here. Impersonating or assaulting a Chelsea pensioner. A Chelsea pensioner is a former member, is a veteran of the British Army. There's a nursing facility in Chelsea where they resided. And in this case, impersonating doesn't mean you're dressing up as them. It meant that you were drawing a pension that you don't deserve. Yeah. And you could be hanged over that.
Stealing from the government.
An army pension.
Yeah.
And then finally, destroying turnpike roads. Why kill someone over destroying a turnpike? Well, historians say there was widespread resentment against toll roads in the early 18th century, just like there is in the 21st century. But carriers had to pay tolls to do what they had previously done for free. And so people were in the habit of destroying those toll roads. And in 1735, it became a capital offense.
Well, the turnpike, there was a physical spot where tolls were actually collected. And, that's part of the word, the origin of the word turnpike. So this is what people were. It's not that they were ripping up the road, really. It's that they were trying to get rid of the need to pay anything.
Somebody's going to have to go back and get a shitload of dimes.
Oh, dear.
So why don't we turn our attention to the canon and maybe some famous murderers in the Sherlock Holmes stories who, had they been apprehended, would have most certainly received the death penalty.
Oh, well, there's good old Stapleton from Hound of the Baskervilles, certainly.
Yeah. Well, I didn't have to worry about him because he disappeared in the Great Grimpen Mire.
Yeah, that's what happens to many of these sorts of nefarious people. And then there's... from
the Five Orange Pips, remember the crew of the Bark Lone Star,
right?
Ended up in Davy Jones' locker instead, as fragments of the ship were found, foundered in a storm.
Yes, and Tonga in Sign of Four, is hustled off the planet by Sherlock Holmes or Watson.
Jefferson Hope in A Study in Scarlet, he died of a heart attack in his cell. He almost certainly would have gotten the death penalty after pursuing Stangerson and Drebber the way he did.
Brunton the butler in the Musgrave Ritual was literally stealing the crown.
That's true. Boy, double whammy there.
Yeah.
He was sealed up for good. I guess that was that was an early exploration of the gas chamber. Rachel Howells.
Well, that gets us to Josiah Amberley, who would be hanged.
Yeah. And although there wasn't murder involved, there was transportation that Jackie Ferguson was sentenced to, and similarly, James Wilder, responsible for the death. Well, he wasn't responsible for the death of Heidegger. He was responsible for the abduction of Lord Salter. But Reuben Hayes, I believe he had initially been sentenced to be hanged, but his sentence was reduced to life imprisonment. Because he murdered Heidegger, who had pursued them.
Yeah, you could equally look at the cases in another way and say, okay, who would not be hanged? And there are some of those people, but clearly Speckled Band, Grimsby Roylott,
he got his comeuppance,
who killed Julius Stoner,
and of course that wonderful scene in the Abbey Grange where Holmes and Watson act as judge, jury, and non-executioner in that case by absolving Captain Crocker of the murder of Brackenstall.
And I wonder if poor old Mrs. Gibson in Thor Bridge, had she survived, if she would have been guilty or hanged because of attempting to frame someone for her murder.
That is an interesting one, yeah. Oh, and our friend Leon Sterndale in The Devil's Foot,
he's got to go.
He said that he came before Tregennis as judge and executioner. And he did indeed execute Mortimer Tregennis, and Holmes basically absolved him and said, go do the other half of your work in Africa.
Oh, and then there's Killer Evans, in the Three Garadebs. Now, he's a known counterfeiter, and he also has the name Killer. I say, Mr. Evans, shall I call you Killer?
Stereotyping.
Nominative determinism, perhaps?
Yeah, but had he lived while the bloody code was still going, that coinage, the offense against coinage would have doomed him.
Yeah.
So, lots to choose from. I don't think this is a comprehensive list, but there are some of the ones that immediately come to mind. Aren't we fortunate now that we live in an age where capital punishment is more rare than the standard, and we still have these wonderful stories to look back on. And that's just a trifle.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
It's a hanging job now.
Only if someone squeals.